If you agree, we will first take the questions on the Corona Response Initiative. Oops, sorry for that. And once we have finished that subject, we will move on to other subjects, including your second question. So the press release which we issued yesterday provides you with the basic explanation of how this is going to work. Fundamentally, this is a liquidity measure in the sense that what we are proposing to do is to give member states who have received pre-financing from the structural funds, from previous tranches of structural funds, and who have not been in a position to spend it, and who would therefore normally be required to pay it back to the EU budget, to keep this funding and to use it as the co-financing, the national co-financing, which they should usually finance, in order to obtain and use the next tranches of structural funding. Okay? This is why we call it a liquidity measure. This is funding which would have been lost and which we now suggest could be used and used to also help member states release the next tranches of structural funding. As to how this is calculated, well, this obviously is based on the amounts which member states have received. Okay, so it is based on the amounts which a given country, say Italy or Belgium or Poland, etc., have received, have not spent, and should have sent back. I cannot give you a breakdown yet by country because the figures are being checked, but we will be coming back to you on this at a later point in time. Follow up.
On that. So does that mean that just like cohesion policy, this will be based on GDP per capita of regions? Because, for example, northern Italian regions don't qualify, as far as I know, for that much cohesion funding because they're considered relatively wealthy. So are we creating a bit of a strange situation here?
Well, we hope we are creating a positive movement. Based on what the Commission can mobilize in the very short term in order to try to alleviate the situation. And clearly we have to work within an existing system. This is why we call it a liquidity measure. The exact funding will depend on what member states have received in terms of their allocation. We are currently working on the proposal, and we hope to be able to adopt this proposal before the end of the week, at which point in time we will be able to provide you with all of the other details, I'm sure. Georgi, is it on this?
Merci, Eric.
Thank you, Eric. On the same subject, and concerning the heads of state and government's video conference. After the video conference, the Bulgarian Prime Minister Boyko Borisov said publicly in front of journalists, and he also wrote this on Facebook, that 70% of the European population is going to be affected by coronavirus. And these were figures that had been mentioned during the video conference. And he said that they were quoted on a scientific basis. So Mr. Borisov quoted the president of the ECB, Mrs. Lagarde, and according to him, she has said that the economic crisis which is going to follow is going to be worse than the Lehman Brothers crisis. That's exactly what was said by her. So what I want to know is this. Mr. Borisov, uses interpreters, and we're never certain that interpretation is correct. I know it is in this room, it's excellent. But did Mr. Borisov understand what was said at the video conference properly? And do his words reflect what was said yesterday?
Merci pour ta question, mais...
Thank you, Georgi, for that question. Well, you'll understand that I'm not part of the European Council, and discussions at the European Council are, by their nature, limited to heads of state and government who participate in them. And it's certainly not for the spokesman service in the Commission to comment on things which might have been said by one or other member of the European Council. So perhaps I could invite you to address your question either to the European Council or to Mrs. Lagarde to ask what she actually said. And as far as we're concerned, what's clear, and what the President said yesterday following the European Council, was that it's quite certain that the current situation is a serious one, both in terms of public health and in terms of the impact that it's going to have on European citizens and on the economy. And that's why we are working in those two areas. And she's very pleased that discussions yesterday in the European Council led to progress on a certain number of initiatives, and that requests were made of the European Council. That's to say that there's going to be a daily video conference between health ministers and home affairs ministers in the member states with the European Council, so that we can have better coordination of measures taken by the different member states. Secondly, the Commission has been asked to set up a team, a medical and scientific team made up of experts, to take stock regularly on the medical side of the situation. And then finally, this was an opportunity for us to announce the measures which I've just presented to you today. Follow-up question. Well, we're talking about video conferences, and the situation is changing. Is there some sort of technical means if there aren't many of us here at this room for good reason, to actually ask questions using video conferencing? Are you working on something like that, or haven't you got that far so far? Well, actually, how amusing. I could be in my bed video conferencing for the press conference with you, and you're participating via WhatsApp. We haven't actually got that far yet, though. But just let me recall that you can get hold of us at any time by phone. We have offices you can come to. We have the midday briefing, but it's just one moment in the day when we can take your questions. And this morning I've already taken a whole number of questions on the outcome of the European Summit, and in particular on the question you've just raised. So I don't think that you'll find yourself in a situation where the media won't have enough information available to them from the spokesman service.
Thank you. To go back on the 25 billion. 7.5 billion and the 25 billion beyond that, the breakdown thereof by member state. I understood what you said, that the exact breakout isn't available yet, but having said that, if I understand correctly, it has nothing to do with the actual needs that member states might have or express arising from coronavirus. Isn't that a problem? First question. Second question. As a result of that, since this 17.5 billion come from structural funds, if I understood correctly, it's re-affecting to slightly different areas from what initially expected. Won't that put some people's noses out of joint, some member states being unhappy? What are the procedures? I don't know procedural. Can the Commission do whatever it wants or not with this money? Well, can I just refocus things a wee bit? The Commission yesterday announced a number of measures. In the economic field, the Commission said that we were going, by the end of the week, to set out guidelines to member states regarding the flexibility in using the rules of the Stability and Growth Pact. Now, this was one thing, and it's a fundamental issue. It will allow member states, depending on the economic and health situation in each member state, to do what's appropriate. Secondly, we also announced that recommendations and guidelines would be forthcoming on flexibility regarding state aid measures. Those are the two essential elements, economically speaking, for the EU's response to member state situations. This response has to be calibrated and measured, responding to the needs of each specific member state. It must and it shall. We also refer to an initiative aimed at using available liquidity quickly with a view to supporting the general effort already mentioned. We didn't say that this initiative is aimed at dealing with all the economic problems arising in all member states. However, given the context where some member states might need extra funds and funds are available, in such a context, we think it would be a pity were we not able to use those funds advisedly. Having said that, will all member states agree? Well, there was also a question off mic. But of course, member states basically have a say. The proposal will be made by the Commission by the end of the week. It will be modifying a regulation. This regulation deals with structural funds common clauses. This regulation will have to be adopted. It will, of course, need to go through the co-legislative process, i.e. Council and Parliament involved. So they will have a say. Furthermore, the partial repositioning of these structural funds will have to take place based on a programming document. This is something member states prepare and is agreed with the Commission. So the Commission isn't taking over funds that are at the member states' disposal. Whatever happens will be done in partnership with the member states, and in any case, everything is complementary to the structural and economic measures, stability pact, state aid, and so forth. They're a top-up. It's not the other way around. Is this still on the same subject? Okay.
Je voudrais peut-être juste vous annoncer que nous allons...
Can I just say that we're going to try to organise... I mean, I can see there's a lot of interest around this topic, but before the end of the week, we'll try to have a technical briefing on this so we can answer your questions more fully. Simply, all this is still in the pipeline, so I don't have all the elements on the proposal just yet.
Merci, Eric. Quelques questions là-dessus.
Yes, just a couple of questions on this. Did I understand correctly that this is a liquidity measure? So the Commission is just trying to guarantee that programmes in those regions which receive funding but which are not able to use that funding can continue to have access to it. But how far is there reprogramming going on, as you were talking about, to the regions and the cities which are affected by the virus? You've got very rich regions in the north of Italy that people have referred to, and at the moment they're not part of those programmes. Can they, or can they not have access to the 25 billion? Second question, who is going to guarantee that these are really projects and needs which link to the crisis with the coronavirus, rather than just a continuation of public financing of projects that we've already had? And then if you think about the Euro crisis and the Greek crisis, at the time, a couple of times we watered down co-funding rules because Greece wasn't able to use European funds properly. Now, if memory serves me correctly, that wasn't a major success because the Greek authorities weren't really on target. Have lessons been drawn from this? And will those 25 billion therefore be used properly? And then there was a question on Borisov. Did I understand correctly that Mrs. von der Leyen did not participate in the whole of that video conference, that you didn't receive a readout from it, because information of 70% of Europeans being affected by the virus does sound to be quite important information to me. And I think it would be rather surprising if the President of the Commission didn't have that information herself.
Je vais répondre à ta première question.
Let me take your final question first. Yes, well, the President did participate in the European Council from the beginning to the very end. I'm not able, because I don't have a readout, a line point by line, point by point readout, that is, of what was said. The President took the floor and spoke on the different actions which we are taking, or which the Member States wanted to ask us to perform. I'm not saying or confirming or contradicting comments from the Prime Ministers because I didn't have access to that meeting. And what was said is really for the people who were there. What is quite clear is that we're fully aware of the fact that this is a very serious medical situation and a serious economic situation too, and we're trying to deal with those two aspects of it. On the rest of your question, what I'd say is that I can't answer now how far within a member state there can be flexibility between the different regions. Perhaps that's something we need to clarify a bit later on, as part of a technical briefing. Or perhaps we might publish some sort of information sheet quickly. But in the case of Italy, you're all rightly, I must say that, referring to the fact that the situation is particularly of concern in the north. But what is being done by the Italian government at the moment covers the country as a whole. Now, when we're talking about moving the focus to different objectives, it's quite clear that this is something that we are looking at, because we announced that we wanted the funding to go to active measures for supporting the labour market, to support the healthcare systems in their operations, and support for SMEs, and also to help those sectors which are particularly badly hit by the crisis in a specific member state. And of course there will be a variance in what that means from one member state to another. So I think what we have to bear in mind is that there will be a potential refocusing, but of course that will always take place in contact with national authorities. As regards the lessons which we've learnt from the past, I think it's a good question, because it really does help me to come back to something which I forgot. One of the other decisions taken yesterday was that as quickly as possible we would be setting up a task force chaired by the Commission with the job of ensuring proper implementation and speediest possible implementation of the funds. So what we're going to be doing is to ensure that these initiatives make it possible for us to have a positive effect on the ground vis-à-vis people concerned and the economic sectors concerned. Right, well, I'm happy to continue taking questions on this subject, but as I said, we're going to try and organise a technical briefing or find some other way of taking the questions which I can't answer today. Mark.
Mark Bevercourt, Volkskrant. I probably will be too impatient, but I mean, do I understand you correctly that, let's say, the use of this 25 billion euros, how it will work in practice is that the member state involved will, let's say, actually ask in the country which companies or whatever, restaurants, air companies, hospitals need support, and then has to come up with a proposal which then will be judged by the Commission if it's okay according to the new criteria. Is this how it's going to work or not?
Well, I cannot give you details on this at the moment. Let's wait a little bit for our proposal, okay, so that we can see. Let me remind you that what you are referring to, I haven't said individual companies. I have said sectors affected by the crisis. For the sort of support measure that you are talking about, we would have obviously the state aid rules and the flexibility granted there. But we have to see. I cannot at this stage, provide you with a detailed draft of the regulation. That is, for the moment, work in progress. And I would suggest that we wait for that. But on this, yes. Sorry, I'll come back to you afterwards. No, hold on.
Oui, Stefan is zeggen.
Regarding those video conferences you were talking about, wouldn't it be useful to have a country like Switzerland involved as well? They're also concerned, but they haven't closed their borders unlike others did with Italy. Secondly, when it comes to supply chain issues for coronavirus-related supplies, the issues with in the internal market rules, what France and Germany are doing, is it all okay? On the second question, we're analysing the measures taken by France and Germany with regard to that, but we'll be giving our analysis as soon as possible when we've completed it. President von der Leyen has clearly said that, well, she's asked Thierry Breton to contact the relevant parts of industry which are at the heart of the health response to the crisis, this with a view of assessing our production capacities, our distribution networks that could be used in Europe for their output, and generally doing what can be done to ensure that we can answer the needs of health systems and of patients, whatever those are. A video conference, as I said, was already held. There will be another one with the same interlocutors in industry next week, and another with pharmaceutical industry and industry that deals with respiratory machinery in particular later on. And the basic aim is that we need to take into account special needs that might lead to a member state having to do something preemptive if it's justified and proportionate. So deal with that and allow for that, but while making sure that patients and health services, wherever they are, still have access to everything they need. On Switzerland, I'm looking around here, but I don't think I've heard anything about it, but we'll get back to you. What I can say that we're in close contact from the outset, have been in close contact with the Swiss authorities. I think I've said that before. These contacts will continue. And a follow-up. It's on the first question, which initially was the second question. Germany is blocking certain products, apparently. Chinese products arriving in Hamburg that should go through Germany to go somewhere else, to say Switzerland. So they're not German products, but they're being seized or impounded. Can you actually do that? Thank you. Well, that's where you get to the heart of the matter, which is something I'm very keen on, which is the single market and how it works. I won't go into any detail. However, what I'll say that in a modern economy, distribution activities are an essential part of that economy, and the industrial value chain starts from production, wherever that may be on the planet, all the way down to the final distribution to the end user. Big logistics centres in this or that member state are, of course, a key point in that value chain or logistics chain. You can't say that something has been stamped made in Germany or made in Italy or wherever. I mean, that's an interesting subject in its own way, but from the point of view of a country, if something is available on their territory and they want to meet specific needs in their territory, then that's the point. It's not where it came from and where it was going to go. We're looking at products being able to reach those who need it. Ill people or health services generally. That's all we're talking about.
Morning, Lavotti in Kronos, Italy. A couple of questions on COVID-19, if I may. The first one is, I don't mean to be rude, but while Commissioner Breton holds video conferences with the industry, Italy has announced a deal with China to have respiratory devices, protective masks and that kind of stuff. Don't you think that the Commission should a bit speed up his response to the crisis? And the second one, I'm not fond of conspiracy theories, but the numbers simply don't add up, because in Germany there are just 2 deaths with 1,500 cases, roughly. While in France there are 1,700 cases and 33 deaths. I mean, I know that Germans are good at doing things, but it's hard to believe for me that they are more than 10 times better than the French. The numbers simply don't add up. I wonder if the Commission has checked these numbers and if you think that they are reliable. Thank you.
On your first point, we are working as fast as we can on the basis of the prerogatives which are ours, and on the basis as well of the existing value chains. One thing is to say we want to ensure that products reach patients and health systems, but that doesn't mean that in Europe you have got at a given point in time the capacity to answer this demand. We live in a globalized economy, and quite clearly some products are produced in Europe up to certain quantities. Others are, and this is quite normal, imported from third countries. Let me remind you that the European Union is the first trade power in the world, and therefore we also live from trade with third countries. What Commissioner Breton has been discussing with the industry is also their capacity to ramp up production within Europe as far as possible and as quickly as possible. On your second question, this is a dimension for my colleague Stéphane, so I will ask him to come up on the podium.
Hello, everyone. Yes, on the figures, maybe it's important to stress that these figures are reported by the member states to the ECDC. They're also reported to the WHO, who are, together with the ECDC, the main institutions which have all the scientific knowledge, I would say, to check numbers. And they're also obviously discussed in the context of the Health Security Committee. So there are different levels at which these figures are being discussed and monitored and reported.
Follow-up?
But I'm sorry to insist, but do you think that these numbers are reliable? Have you checked the way in which these data are collected? Because, I repeat, just 2 deaths for 1,500 cases, it's pretty odd. I mean, because in France they are more than 10 times higher. So there's something, the numbers simply don't add up. I mean, in my opinion.
I understand what you're saying, but I think we, from our side, Commission side, we rely on the scientific advice from the ECDC and the WHO. And so I believe it's probably to take up with them if you have any questions on the actual methods and methodologies which are used for these kind of to come to these kind of figures.
Yes, at the back, yes. I'll come back to you.
Yeah, hi Eric, thanks very much. It's a related question. Michael Gove in the House of Commons said this morning that the British hope was that future relationship talks can still go ahead next week, but that today they'd received some information from Belgium about a public health concern and that might mean that the talks can't go ahead in the UK next week. Could I just check what contacts there have been between the Commission and the UK about next week's talks and if there has been any discussion about postponement at this stage?
As far as I'm aware, the talks are still scheduled to go as far as we are concerned, and if there are any changes, we will inform you. Yes, Lorenzo, you want to come back to the issue? Stéphane, I think you should. This is for Stéphane again on the health dimension. Okay, let's see.
Well, it's on the same question on the Germans, but this is a precise question concerning the rights and the work of member states in the coordination system which exists. You know, we've got the rapid alert system and others, but does a member state have an obligation to provide exact and correct figures within that system? Tommaso's question is a realistic one. We've got mortality rates, and when you look at mortality rates in Germany, they are quite off the scale. We've got 5% in Italy at the moment. China, it was never less than 1 or 2%. So if you've got a country which has 10 times fewer cases, then something's wrong. It could be that there are so many more deaths which haven't been counted. So my question is that within the systems in place, are member states under an obligation to provide correct figures? And what happens if the figures aren't correct? If we were to trust the system, if a member state isn't providing the correct figures, then there's a problem.
Thank you. Oui, en effet, on s'attend à ce que les...
Well, yes, we do expect the figures given by member states, for example, within the Health Security Committee or to the ECDC, we expect those figures to be correct. Obviously, you've got to take on board the situation in each individual member state and the people who are concerned, etc. But when it comes to the numbers and their calculation, then I think that the methodological approach. Well, it's the member states who could really give you a better view of that, the experts, the scientists, the ECDC, etc.
OK, d'autres questions? Coronavirus? Toujours? Oui.
Anything else on coronavirus?
Merci. D'abord, si tu le permets, une...
Thank you. First of all, just to make sure I understand the magic 25 billion out of 7.5 billion transmutation and how it works. Supposing a member state had run out of structural funds as initially allocated, so there's nothing spare to redeploy and back to the EU, then there's nothing available for them out of the new measure. That's what you're saying, isn't it? Okay. Second point. You talked about agreement with Parliament and Council. For the slots and airlines, I think it's the same thing again, isn't it? Parliament and Council have to agree too. In such a context, and in other cases than the two I've mentioned, there could be other legal situations of that ilk, do you not fear that there could be a problem? There's a council meeting cancelled or postponed. It was supposed to happen tomorrow. Parliament is on half speed. If things get worse, the whole legislative process is going to be run into the sand, isn't it? Thank you, Hollande. On the first question, here's how I understand it. Everything is based on available funds as of now in the packages for individual member states. So if a member state has no funds left over, this liquidity measure can't be used in that member state. That's how I understand the Commission's proposal as intended. The Commission's proposal is aimed at using existing funds and unblocking the pipelines for them. Now, you talked about magical transmutation. There's nothing magical about this, so I'll have to refute that idiom. It's using funds that are there and available. That's why we didn't call it a Corona Respond Fund. It's an initiative. Because this is not new. These are not new funds. These are unutilized funds. It would, however, be a pity, were there to be funds available, not to be able to use them amongst other instruments. And this liquidity measure could be used, if it can be, to the current health and economic issues. Thank you. On the second question, on how we make our decisions in the EU, the decision-making process is what it is. The EU works within institutional frameworks that exist. From our point of view, we work as quickly as we can within our prerogatives and remit, and the Commission counts upon the desire and capacity for cooperation in the other institutions with a view to taking these matters forward as quickly as possible.
Any other questions on coronavirus? Yes, please.
Thanks, Eric. Giulia Bedini from MLEX. So still concerning coronavirus and the measures announced yesterday by President von der Leyen on aviation, do we have a more specific timeline for that? She said that the Commission will put forward very rapidly targeted legislation and that these measures will be temporary. Is the Commission already eyeing a certain amount of time to which these obligations will not apply due to the impact of coronavirus on the industry? Thanks.
Stéphane? Stéphane's double hat on health and transport is particularly useful in the current context.
Thank you. Indeed, President von der Leyen has announced that the Commission will take these measures very rapidly, and that's actually what we are doing on our side. We're trying to prepare proposals on this amendment of the SLETS regulation as quickly as possible, after which, as Erik has said, the proposal will go to the co-legislators on whom we rely to help us coming to a quick amendment of this SLOTS regulation. The actual details, of course, of what will be in this regulation are still being worked out. I would, however, like to stress one thing here that has to do with the timing. It is true that the legislative process takes some time, but we should not forget the fact that as far as slots are concerned, the next season of slots starts on the 29th of March, and that's the so-called summer slots. And these summer slots have already been allocated last year. So these slots are already, I would say, preserved, which means that we have time to make sure that this proposal follows the legislative process as it should be, obviously as quickly as possible, but we do have a certain time, taking into account that these slots have already been allocated.
All right. Lorenzo? Still on this, huh? No, sorry, because we have this, then we have, sorry, I mean on COVID in general.
Okay, see you later.
Yeah, no, well, hold on.
Okay.
Don't go.
I'm sorry.
Oui, en Italie, il y a...
Well, in Italy, there were requests from certain people, such as Mr. Salvini and even Mr. Renzi, who've been saying that it would be necessary to extend to the whole of the EU the Italian red zone. So the Italian red zone would cover the whole of the EU. Is that a possibility? What would be necessary for that to be a possibility? And here we're talking in this discussion also about fears in some member states that people are going to be asking for coronavirus-free certification for products, in particular those coming from Italy. In Parma, for example, it's been said that there's no risk of contagion via food products. But what is the situation there for certification of being coronavirus-free? Is this in line with the internal market, or does it violate its principles? I mean, what is the situation there? Because the measures being taken in Italy now concern individuals, not products. Well, on the first part of your question there, all I can do is just recall what I said at the beginning of today's midday meeting. That's to say that as of now, there's going to be a daily meeting of Ministers for Health and Home Affairs in order to coordinate and to exchange information, and also to enable them to coordinate the measures which they take. Now, I'm sure this is going to be a very effective and a very strong way of recognising the best strategies to deal with the crisis. Rather than just looking at strictly individual measures. But I think that you have to remember that within the framework of the European Treaty, health measures are within the purview of national ministers. So here we're talking about the different prerogatives on the side of the member states and the EU, but to try and bring things together and move in the right direction. On the single market point, Sonia, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add here, but what's clear is that if there are any cases where that sort of request is being made, then at European level there are mechanisms which will allow people to file complaints. And at that point, the European Commission would investigate such complaints. So that would be how things would work. Our approach is that we would actually look at specific cases. Yes, well, these requests for certification come from private companies importing Italian products. It's not the national authorities who are doing that. And normally, when you're talking about public procurement, the requirements there come from the authorities. So it's a question really of who is asking the Italian companies to certify coronavirus free. But we're talking about requests which have been coming from private companies, so it doesn't affect the member states.
Oui, mais dans le cas où il s'agirait des privés.
Yes, but if we're talking about private companies or individuals, are there any laws which could stop them from making those requests? You see, the thing is, in the distribution chain at the moment, you have major players there, and if they decide to ask the Italians for this certification, that's going to be a disaster for the economy. It's not something which is based upon scientific evidence. Are there ways of discouraging this sort of action and showing that it's not at all rational? Well, normally these are private contracts between private individuals, and it's not European Union law which applies there. So we're analysing the situation to see exactly what the impact is and what the legal position is. Well, if you'll allow me, there are two things I can say here. Firstly, there's the strictly legal side to this, which Sonia's just told us about. But secondly, there's always the possibility for an economic operator to contact the European Commission or the national authorities to inform them of a problem which seems to be affecting them quite seriously, to make it possible to analyse the reasons for that situation and what measures can be taken there.
Okay, still on coronavirus? Yes.
Thank you, Petra from the Willers of Slovenia News Agency. It's about the border measures taken by Slovenia and Austria in relation with the virus. In the past weeks, you advised against such measures. And the French president was yesterday critical. He criticized them as bad decisions. So my first question is, what's your assessment of the situation now? How do you assess these measures? Second, I would like to ask if you could give us an overview of how many member states have so far introduced such measures. And the third thing, and I'm asking you this because the Commission's role is to facilitate the coordination among member states. How is it possible that with all coordination meetings going on, and in fact that just after the video conference where leaders were supposed to coordinate their response, we have one leader criticizing two member states? I mean, this gives the impression that you're not able to coordinate and that things are out of control. And I'm asking this because this is bad if you want to have, if you want the public to have trust in your measures, and the public trust is crucial if you want to stop the spreading of the virus. Thank you.
On your last element, let me remind you that we were tasked yesterday by the European Council to coordinate the response measures, to help the coordination of the response measures in the context of this daily video conference between health and interior ministers. So we are working in a context where, as I was saying before, measures related to health are the responsibility of member states. And now we are stepping up our collective response by organizing these daily contacts and ensuring that the Commission can play its role in the coordination. For the other questions, I would ask Adalbert to come up.
Thank you very much. So regarding border measures, as Eric mentioned, the measures relating to health, including also measures that take place at the border, are indeed the responsibility of national authorities. From our perspective, as we've expressed several times, we believe that such measures should be based on scientific advice, that they should be proportionate, and that they should be coordinated between the member states. And in fact, in order to assist in this coordination, we have launched a weekly exchange with member states' border authorities in order to understand their practices and in order to discuss with them how best we can proceed together. These video conferences take place on Wednesdays. So as of a few minutes ago, this week's video conference was ongoing. And as a result, I would like to wait for the outcome of this video conference before giving you the overview that you asked for of all the different measures that member states would have shared with us.
Follow-up.
So are those measures, in your view, proportionate and based on scientific advice and as they should be? Are they proportionate?
Sorry, I will not be able to comment on individual measures taken by the member states. For the moment, what we are doing is exchanging information with member states and using this video conference that we set up in order to coordinate. Now, there is a specific legal situation as regards the measures under Schengen Borders Code, which would amount to reintroduction of internal border controls, which then member states have to notify to the European Commission. But that so far has not happened.
On this? Yes.
So has the Austrian government contacted you? Because we all know that the Commission's approach is that cooperation, not border controls, will stop the virus. But I mean, according to the Schengen agreement, border controls is one thing. Banning citizens to enter the country is a different thing.
So your question is whether Austria has notified the measures to us?
Whether the government has contacted you, and also if you agree that the step taken by the Austrian government yesterday has a different quality than border controls.
As I said, we were just having this video conference, which is this weekly exchange with member states, and I believe this issue was raised at that video conference. But I would like to wait to have a proper readout of this before commenting on what was exactly said. And we haven't yet received a notification under the Schengen Borders Code of the measures by Austria.
Holland.
I had a look into the Schengen Border Code yesterday, and I saw that border controls can be introduced in case of threat to public order. There's no saying of public health, public order, terrorism, organized crime, but not public health. So it's not foreseen in the Schengen Border Code. Can you confirm this?
That's not entirely accurate, I'm afraid. The internal border controls can be introduced by member states in case of threat to internal security or public policy. And as we've in fact already said a couple of times here, public health issues could be covered by this broad term of public policy.
Thank you, Adalbert. Any other questions on coronavirus? On coronavirus? No. If it's not coronavirus, then It is, okay.
Another question on coronavirus, but I think it's not for Albert. The Nobel Prize for Economy, Joseph Stiglitz, said that according to him, the Stability and Growth Pact should be suspended because it is not adapted to cope with the huge crisis which is going to hit Europe. I wonder if the Commission thinks that the Stability and Growth Pact is a feasible and usable tool to deal with the huge crisis which is coming, which might be worse than the 2008 crisis. Thank you.
Well, we believe that there is flexibility in the Stability and Growth Pact, and that we should make use of the flexibility. This Friday, the Commission will be coming forward with its guidelines on how to use this flexibility to best effect. And I suggest that we wait until we see these guidelines before we comment further. Any other questions on coronavirus? No? Then